but that's not good.
Okay, so go ahead and get out your packet and turn to page 9. Okay, so last Thursday we looked at translations. I remember you were supposed to do this page right here, page 7 and 8. That's going to be for your grade later on.
Today?
We did that last Thursday. But page 7 and 8 is going to be for grade at the end of the unit. We'll turn it in like next week sometime. But remember, translation is just a slide in the coordinate plane. So all we do is move it up and down and side to side. Today we're going to be looking at reflections. And reflections are a flip in the coordinate plane. So when we have reflections, they flip a shape over a line of reflection. And every time you have a reflection, it's going to give you your line of reflection. Like when it asks you to reflect, it's going to say over a specific line.
Over like the x-axis and y-axis, or is it like a different?
There's 6 different ways it can go. And they're down at the bottom. Okay, so when a figure has been reflected, it will be a mirror image. So no matter what line we're reflecting over, it's going to reflect exactly over that line. So if you fold the graph in half over your line of reflection, they should match up exactly. So there are rules that we can use, coordinate rules for these. Just like we have coordinate rules for translations. Translations coordinate rules change with every translation, but with reflections, they actually stay the same for the 4 main reflections. So the first reflection we have is an x-axis reflection. That means it's just going to flip exactly over that x-axis. And the rule for that is xy goes to x negative y. So if I found my coordinate for A, where's it at? At 2,
2, negative
2, positive 2. So if I want to get my A prime, all I have to do is leave my x alone. So A prime, I leave the x value alone. And then I change the sign of the y value. So this doesn't mean that it's always going to be negative. It just means you're going to change the sign of it. So right here is positive 2. What's my new y value going to be? Negative 2. So I'll be right here at 2, negative 2. There's my A prime. For x-axis, yes. And if you look at it, see your 2 above it right here. And then when you reflect it, you're 2 below it. Yeah.
So if it's saying over the x-axis, but it's on the x-axis,
It'll just stay right there on that.
you don't change a single
So
thing.
like if it's right here and it says reflect over the x-axis, it stays right there where it's at.
So that's when you don't change the sign at all.
Because if it's on the x-axis, that would be, like that point right there is 5, 0.
Yep.
You can't change the sign of a 0. So it would just stay at 0.
You have to mark it like, you know how you put the A?
You'd have A and A prime.
Okay.
Okay. So the second one we have is a y-axis reflection. And this time it'll reflect over the y-axis. So instead of the y sign changing, on this one the x sign changes. So my point that I start with is at negative 1, 3. So I change the sign of my x, and I leave my y alone. So my A prime will be at, the y doesn't change, what's the x going to be? Positive 1, because we just changed the sign. So I'll be at 1, 3 for my a prime. All I did was fold it right over the y-axis. So 1 to the left, 1 to the right. Okay. And notice that if you look over at the right side of the paper, so over here, I have a thing that says y equals a number. Notice that when we were just looking at the y-axis, it goes up and down, but when you have y equals a number, it goes side to side. It's always opposite of the axis. Same with x equals a number. It's opposite the direction of its axis. And we'll talk about that more in a second. So looking at y equals x, so if I reflect over y equals x is a linear line, a linear function where it's rise over run. It's rise and run are 1 over 1. So this is your line y equals x, and you'll reflect over that line y equals x. And the rule for y equals x reflection is you switch the place of the x and the y. So notice when you have y equals x, it goes yx, right? Look at the coordinates in here when you change them, it's yx. So anytime you have this, just know it's going to be in that same order, yx. So I have a is at 1, negative 1. I'm going to flip those coordinates to get my a prime. So negative 1, positive 1. I just flip their order down here for that. So I'm at negative 1, positive 1 for a prime.
Like the x is negative 1.
Mm-hmm.
So it's saying flip them, like that's how you get the answer, but in the end, x is negative 1 and y is positive.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's still going to be, this is your new x, this is your new y. So it's just telling you how it's switching. So this is your original, this is your image, your post thing. Okay, and then we have y equals negative x, and it's the same thing except both of them will be negative with y equals negative x. So, well, you change the signs of both of them. So if there's a negative there, just know you're going to switch their places, and you're going to put a negative sign in front of both of them and change their signs. So here, I have a is at negative 2, 0. So I'm going to switch their order and change both of their signs. So my y is going to come first for my new x, and I can't change the sign of a 0 because 0 is neither negative nor positive. And then I have my negative x. A negative times a negative makes a positive, so I'll have positive 2 right there. So I'll be at 0, positive 2 for my a prime. Okay, and then the last two kinds that we can have is the reflection over y equals a number or x equals a number. For that, there's no rule. You just have to look at it, and what I do is I count from where my line of reflection is. I have to go down 2 to get to that a, right? So if I want to reflect it over that line, I have to go up 2, right? So if I go down 2 to get to my a, I go up 2 to get to my a prime. So here's my line of reflection, and notice that is y equals negative 3. So when we have a y equals, we're going to go on our y-axis, and we're going to find that number. So I went on my y-axis, and I found negative 3. And I drew a line right here, because every single value right here has a y value of -3. Here I'm at 1, -3, 2, -3, 3, -3, 4, -3, -5, -3. So that's why this is the line we're going over. That's where every single value on that line has a y that is -3. Okay? And then when I have a reflection over x equals a number, I go on my x-axis to that number. Here's the x equals 4, and I go up and down because every single value on that line has an x value of 4. 4, -1, 4, -2, 4, 3. So every x value there is 4. And notice I have my a that is 1 to the right. So when I flip it over this line, it's going to be 1 to the left. 1 to the right, 1 to the left. That's where my new a is going to be. So those are your 6 type of reflections that we're going to be looking at. And you do have to remember these rules. You have to know those by the time of the test. It is a part of your test to fill those blanks out. On the test, you fill in what the rules are, and then I actually give you a copy of the rules. But like on your final and stuff, you would not be able to have the rules given to you. You have to know those rules. So go ahead and flip over to page 10. So on page 10, number 1, I'm going to call it number 1, doesn't have a number. But you want to find the rule for this transformation. So I'm going to look at one of the letters to its prime. So I'm going to look at B to B prime. I'm going to look at the distance between those. How far apart are those? They're 4 apart, right? Meet halfway between them, and that's where your line of reflection would be. This line of reflection is always halfway between them. So looking at that, what is that line of reflection? It is on the x-axis. So what we have here is a reflection over the x-axis. And it wants us to write a rule for that. So we're going to have x comma y goes to. And if I forget my rule, I can look at those coordinates that I have and see if I can find it out. B starts at -3, +2. And B prime ends up at -3, -2. So looking at that, did my x values change here? No, my x value didn't change. So I just write that as x still. But did my y values change?
Yeah.
How'd they change? Their signs are opposite. So we'll have opposite sign of y for that rule. But that is a known rule for all of those reflections over the x-axis. Okay. So looking at the second one, I want to reflect over the line y equals x. So I'm actually going to draw my line of reflection here. So I'm going to draw my line of reflection over to y equals x. It's just the straight line through the origin, diagonal across the graph. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write out what my coordinates are. So where does A start?
-3, positive. That's 2 there.
And B starts at
-2, positive 5, 4. 2.5.
and C is at
-1, positive.
-1, positive 1. So my rule that I need to remember for a reflection over y equals x is that my x, y, so my starting coordinates, change to be in the order of y, x. So my new coordinates should have the order of y, x. So I'm actually going ahead and I'm going to go ahead and write those out. So A prime, all you're going to do is switch the place of your two coordinates. So what's my A prime going to be?
2,
2, -3. Then my B prime, going to switch those. So what's the order going to be?
4, -2.
4, -2. And then C prime,
4, -1.
1, -1. And then I'll plot those points and label them as I go. So I'm going to be at 2, -3 for A prime. 4, -2 for B prime. And 1, -1 for C prime. So if I folded that graph in half over that pink dotted line, I would have a perfect reflection of that shape. Okay, the number 3, I have a reflection, so I'm going to reflect the figure over y equals -1. So I'm going to go to my y-axis. So on my y-axis, I'm going to find where y equals -1. Here's where y equals -1, right here. So that's going to be my line of reflection. Right there. So remember, there's not a rule for when you reflect over y equals -1. So instead of writing out my coordinates like I did a second ago, I'm just going to look at how far above or how far below the starting point is. So D is on the line, right? So it's 0 above or 0 below, right? So that means it's going to stay right where it's at. It's going to move 0 units. So there's D prime. Stays right where it's at. Then E prime is 1 above. So when I reflect it over, it's going to be 1 below. So if it's 1 above, go 1 below for E prime. So it's at 0, -2. And then F prime is 1 below. To flip it or reflect it over that line, we'll go 1 above. So F prime will be right here. And again, if I folded that graph in half, right over that y equals -1, I would have a perfect reflection. They line up perfectly. Okay, any questions? Okay, let's look at page 11. Okay, so on page 11, looking at that top, basically you're going to match up the bottom 4 with the top 4, basically. So you're going to match the words with the rule. So if I reflect over y equals x, which one of those 5, 6, 7, or 8 is the rule for over y equals x?
6.
6. So those two match up. Then, if I reflect over the x-axis, what changes, the x sign or the y sign?
Y sign.
So which one does it match up with? 5. Okay, then y equals -x matches with
7.
number 7. And y-axis matches with number 8.
What are they talking about?
Okay? So looking at number 9, I need to find what kind of reflection we have and write the rule for that reflection.
Reflect over x-axis.
So,
That's the answer.
Yeah. It's going to reflect over the x-axis. You can look at it and see that, or you can go back in and check. So I'm going to pick R. R starts at 3, 2, and R prime is at 3, -2. So what changed from there? The X didn't change, but the Y sign changed, right? So my rule would be XY goes to
X. Negative.
X -Y. That's my rule for that. Okay. Looking at number 10, looking at it, I can personally see what it's reflecting over. But you might not be able to see it when you're just looking at it. So if you can't see it right there, I'm just going to look at B or A, doesn't really matter. I'm gonna do B. Yes. So B is at -3, -1. And B prime is at -1, -3. So what happened to those coordinates from B to B prime? They flipped, right? So my XY went to YX. So what line did that reflect over?
Y.
The Y equals X. Okay. Looking at number 11. Does anybody have any guesses about which line that reflects over? Just looking at it.
X equals 2.
So, looking at it, I don't see exactly what line it's reflecting over. I could look at its coordinates, or I could look at the distance between the two. How many units are between D and D prime? 2, right? So halfway between that is right here. Looking at E to E prime, there's 4 units between those. Halfway between them is 2, so this would be where it's reflecting over. So that means that this line right here is the line that I'm reflecting over. So that means that it's not the x-axis, it's not y-axis, it's not y equals x, and it's not y equals negative x.
It's no.
It's reflecting over. That number where it hits, what axis is that on?
The x-axis.
The x-axis. So I have x equals a number, and what is that number?
2.
2. Reflecting over x equals 2. Is there a rule for reflecting over x equals a number?
No.
No. So for that one, you'd write no rule. Okay. Looking at number 12, if I just look at the distance between n and n prime, halfway between them is this line right here. If I did the same thing with O, it'd be right here. So what is that line? That is the y-axis. So it's a reflection over the y-axis. And then I need a rule for it. If I can't remember the rule, remember I can look at the coordinates of 2 points. So I'm going to look at P and P prime. P is at 4, 1. P prime is at negative 4, 1. What changed?
The x.
The sign of the x. So I'm going to have negative x, comma, y. Okay, number 13, looking at that one, it doesn't look like an obvious answer by one of the axes. So I'm going to look at how far apart H and H prime are. They're 2 apart. That means they reflect over this line. I is still on the same spot, so that means it reflected over that line. And then G reflects over that same line because they're 4 apart, and halfway between them will be 2. And I don't know why it's not showing up. So this is on my iPad. Okay, so looking at number 15, with one like that, I personally like to have more room so I could write out my coordinates. So, but this does not give me much room to do that. So I'm going to try to write them at the bottom of that at the bottom of that square. So R starts at 1, negative 2. T starts at 3, negative 3. And S at 2, -4. So all I'm doing with those, it gives me the rule at the top. It says x, y goes to x, -y. So all I have to do with that is I just have to change the coordinates according to what the rule says. But if I didn't have that rule, what am I reflecting over? The x-axis. That's the rule for x-axis reflection. So to change my r, all I'm going to do is change the sign of the y. So x stays the same, y becomes +2. So my r prime is at 1, +2. Then my s prime is going to be at 2, what? +4. And then my t prime is at 3, +3. So I reflected my shape over the x-axis. And don't forget to label your point.
This is up stuff.
What?
Stuff.
On.
It don't make sense.
Okay, looking at number 16, we have x, y goes to y, x. So what is that reflecting over when they switch places like that? Y equals x. So I'm going to start with D. D starts at what is that point? -2. -2. E starts at 1, -1. F is at 3, -3. And G is at 0, -4. And I'm reflecting over that line right there. So when I have my new point, it should be reflecting perfectly over that line. So D prime, gonna switch their places, and that's just still gonna be at -2, -2. So D prime stays in the same spot, because it's on the line of reflection. Okay, now E prime, I'm going to switch their places. It's at 1, -1. So what's my image for E going to be? -1, +1. So I'm going to be at -1, +1 with my E prime. F starts at 3, -3. What's the coordinates of my F prime? -3, +3. Just flip them. And then what's my G prime's coordinates?
0, positive.
-4, 0.
-4, 0. Okay, anybody got any questions about that one? Okay, so on number 17, it wants you to reflect over x equals -1. So my first thing, I'm gonna go on my x-axis, and I'm going to look for -1. Here's my -1, right? There's where x equals -1. So that right there is going to be my line of reflection. So this right here is my line of reflection, where all of the x's are -1. So I'm going to reflect A and B over that blue line. How far to the left is A from that blue line?
2.
2 units. So I'm going to go 2 units to the right to get my A prime. So here's my A prime, and that is at 1, 5. And then B is 1 to the left. For B prime, I go 1 to the right. And there's my B prime at 0, 0. Okay, any questions on that one? So looking at number 18, reflect over the y-axis. So when I reflect over the y-axis, I need to remember that my rule is x, y goes to -x, regular y. So I'm changing the sign of all my x values. So if I look at L starts at -4, 3.
Are the coordinates a requirement?
If I put on your test or quiz to fill in the blank for the coordinates, yeah. Like right here, they're not required because in the directions, it doesn't tell you to. But I use them to graph. You could do the counting L's 4 to the left, go 4 to the right.
That's easier for me.
So L prime is going to be at, change the sign of your X and then keep your Y. So at 4, 3. So like what I was just telling Caden is there's 4 right here for the L. And then right here, I move 4 to the right. So 4 to the left, 4 to the right. If you didn't want to write out the coordinates. So M starts at -1, 4. Change the sign of the M to get M prime. It'll be at +1, 4. And it's 1 to the right, because M is 1 to the left, M prime is 1 to the right. And then N starts at -3, 0. change the sign, so n prime is going to be at positive 3, 0. That is a perfect reflection over the y-axis. If you're doing these and you see that your shape is not looking like what it started with, if it doesn't look about near identical, you need to go back and check. See which point looks weird to you, go back and check that point. Okay, on number 19, we're reflecting over y equals 4. So I'm going to go on my y-axis and I'm going to go to 4. That is that point right there. So I'm going to reflect over this line y equals 4. So x is on that line of reflection. So my x prime just stays on the line of reflection. Y is 1 above, y prime will be 1 below the line of reflection. Then z is 1 below, z prime will be 1 above. So basically they stay on the same x value, their y values is what's changing. Okay, on number 20, it gives you the coordinate rule. So what you're going to have to do with that coordinate rule is you're going to take your original coordinates and you're going to change their position and you're going to change their sign. So if I'm at 1, 4 for J prime is going to be at what? Switch their place and change their sign.
-4, -2.
-4, -1. So there's my J prime. I starts at 2, 1. So for I prime, we're going to switch those coordinates and change the sign. So what's my I prime's coordinate?
-2, -1.
-1, -2. Gotta switch their places. Okay, so it says that I have my -y, -x. Remember when you switch their orientation like that, it's going to be a y equals x one, and since they're both negative, that means it's reflecting over y equals -x. And this is your line of reflection when y equals -x. So if I folded it directly in half over that pink line, they'd line up perfectly. Okay, any questions? Okay, on number 21, we're reflecting over x equals 3. So I'm going to go to my x-axis, and I'm going to go to where I know x equals 3. This is where x equals 3. You can't really see it. But right there, x equals 3. So that right there is going to be my line of reflection. So starting with A is 1 to the left or one to the right, A prime will be one to the left. B is 2 to the right, B prime's 2 to the left. We're basically just counting 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 1. So with C, I go 1, 2, 1, 2. There's my C prime. And then D, 1, 1. There's D prime.
That one don't make sense. Oh, yeah, it does.
Okay, so looking at number 22, it's telling me that I'm going to reflect over with my coordinate rule of negative x, y. So that means that my x value is changing, my y value stays the same. So that means I'm reflecting over my y-axis. So I'm going to start with t. T starts at negative 5, 3. So to get t prime, all I'm going to do is change the sign of the x and leave the y alone. So what's my t prime's coordinates?
5, 3.
Positive 5, positive 3. Then u starts at negative 3, positive 4. So where's my u prime going to be?
3, 4. Positive 3.
Yeah.
Yep. And then v starts at negative 1, 1. So where's v prime going to be? Positive 1, 1. Okay. Number 23, we're reflecting over y equals negative x. So that means we're going to reflect over this line right here. is the line that we are reflecting over. And remember, when we have y equals negative x, that means that our coordinates are changing. They're gonna flip their orientation and they're going to change their sign because of that negative. They change sign. So L starts off at -1, 2. Flip its orientation. So it's going to be 2, -1, and then I have to change both of their signs. So I'll be at -2, +1. So there's my L prime. Then K is at -4, -3.
-3, +4.
So I'm gonna switch their orientation, so I'll be at -3, -4, but I also have to change their signs, so they'll both be positive. So I'll be at +3, +4. Anybody got any questions? Okay, so looking at page 13 and 14, this is another one of the ones that
Oh,
you are
gosh.
going to have to turn in for a grade.
My tongue go.
When? Hey, when are we turning this over to?
Whenever I tell you to turn all
Next
of
week.
them.
No,
It's gonna
not
be
next,
sometime
not
next
next
week.
week.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
It's not next.
I was just making sure we didn't ask for it.
So first thing you have to do on number 1 is you're going to plot the coordinates for the original shape. So those are at +3, +2, +8, +9.
Where?
And then C is at 10, 2.
10. I can never draw a straight line. Like, really just so bad. Not me. Wrong. Like,
Like,
we finna reflect over it.
and notice when you look at the directions for these, the directions are different than the ones we did last week. You don't keep going off the shape before, you go off the original every single time.
That's, I think on like crossovers, it's gonna get sketchy.
And on number 4 on there, I have to go and check, but it's not gonna be over the origin. It's gonna be something a little different.
Don't copy on that.
Being,
Instead of it saying the origin, it's gonna be y equals -x. So make sure you change that number 4 out there. Make sure you change number 4.
so, white. This is like our homework, basically. That we don't have time to finish, so we gotta do it at home so we can turn it in and get a good grade. Start with the same thing.
So,
Original shape.
if I'm looking at number 2, and it's the red one, it says I need to reflect over the x-axis. So that means I'm going to have x negative y. So my a prime will be at 3, negative 2. It's not, I don't know.
Why am I in person? With that being.
And b is going to be at 8, negative 9. And c is at 10, negative 2. And then when you want to do the next one, it's going to be blue and it wants you to reflect over the the y-axis, but you're gonna go back to the original coordinates. Don't base what you have off of the ones you just did. So I'm going back up to the black ones and I'm just gonna change all of my x values and leave all the y values as they were. So I have negative 3, 2, negative 8, 9, and negative 10, 2. So remember, you're always basing off of the black ones.
Wait. I think I did, number, 5, skip number 4.
I'm not number 5.
Skip number 4.
No, I didn't know. There's number 4 and
You did number 5.
this is
You
why.
didn't do number 4.
I didn't know. What?
So you did negative color.
Yeah,
What is that?
it's right here.
No, you didn't.
One.
Never mind, never mind, never
One.
mind.
Yes, 5 is 4. This is 2 seconds.
No, still my puppet.
Uh-uh. Stop. Stop. Stop.
This.
I took it to the ocean. And forgot I had it. Yes.
Don't put it in my face, I swear.
You said that same thing?
I swear.
Bro.
But how do you like it? Okay. You good? Good night. Why are you doing?
I found it 6.
Okay, so that's what you should have for those first two. The red and the blue.
Why? It's like, oh, why you not like that? Wait, isn't that right?
What?
If you got y equals 9, you go to the 9, and then you go like like with the x-axis. You know what I'm saying?
No.
So if you're at y equals 9, you're at this line right here.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, that's what.
And then you just reflect it over it, right?
Are you gonna scrap for death? What time was it?
In 4 minutes.
I thought it was different because of Homer.
Yeah, I thought you.
Huh?
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it. Is that the right view? You have to charge them.
Huh?
Charge them. He wants to know when you need that bag.